So guess what?
What's that, Mark?
You're on the Art Dealer Diaries.
All righty.
This
This will be my first diary then, my entire life.
Ever? You've never journaled once in your entire life?
I was never a girl to do that.
You know, I never did either. And it's funny, I became a writer, but I don't journal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've never been a note taker either. And when I was in
That's
school,
important these
when I
days.
was in school, I took a lot of notes, but I never really developed that as part of my, business tools. It was, I've really had a pretty good memory, which is odd since my mother and grandmother both died of dementia.
But you bring up a memory, and just to let people know who we are and what we are. I mean, this is a show about what comes through an art dealer's life. Terry Schurmeier has come through my life 25 years ago, and really was one of the premier people I wanted to have on the show because you're a mover and shaker in our business, and to have be in this world, which is, I think you'll be the first to say, is a man's world when it comes to the antique and especially cowboy and Indians kind of stuff, is really I just admire people who can step out of their field and go, I'm going to just, not only am I going to be a leader, I'm going to be the leader in certain areas. So Terry Schurmeier is here, and I just want you to let people know, because people may not know who you are. Maybe you can tell them about your history. I learned some stuff reading your bio about getting your degree in psychology, right?
I have a degree in pre-med, and I have a degree in psychology, and then I did master work up until my thesis, and the week I was going to present my thesis, I had my son, and I just never went back. I was never planning on working in the corporate world. By the time I went back to get my graduate degree, I had already decided I was never going to work for anyone again in my life.
And when was that? When you said, okay, I'm not going to have a job that is the normal job?
That was about 1983. 83, maybe the beginning of 84.
And you had worked as a social worker?
I did. I had 21 teenage girls that were considered at the end of the line in child and family youth development in California. Mm-hmm. So these were kids that stabbed a parent, burned their house down, Your
typical millennials of today, then.
Really a problem kids, but we had 2 houses, and I helped administer that, and learned very quickly that I was way too empathetic to be a social service person.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because you would think it'd just be the opposite, but you probably do have to be a little brutal to.
Yeah, I think after the 4th time I ran away with one of the kids, and it was really an emergency sort of person, and I took off, and I was in my bare feet, and we stopped about 7.5 miles later.
Wow.
And I just thought, this is not a long-term career.
So that was the 80s.
That was the 80s.
And then at some point you said, okay, I want to become
yeah, well, I had to
dealer.
Escape for a while. I left California when I went out of social service work quickly. The people who owned our facility got divorced, and so all the kids were moved. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of very traumatic, and so I left and went to Wyoming for a few years and ran a bar and restaurant.
How was that?
That was fun.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was also it was the 80s, and that was during the big overthrust belt development of Wyoming and oil and gas, and it was like a clash similar to what we are dealing with politically today, but it was kind of a clash of 2 totally different people from completely different conceptualizations of what life should be. You had these ranchers that had been there for 3 or 4 generations of people who traveled across America, in covered wagons and developed their place there. So it was truly Old West stock. And then you had all of these transients from, Oklahoma and Alabama,
California.
and Louisiana. Some from California, but a lot of people were from the Gulf area because they worked in oil and gas. and they had experience as tool pushers, and so they all came up there for the work. And you never saw two different groups of people that thought differently about how, to act and behave.
Right.
And, the Wyoming guys were all kind of pretty quiet and to themselves, and they had rodeo and stuff to get crap out of their system.
Right.
And these Transians didn't have any connections to people or anything else, and they would just come in and start fights in the bar, and it was
So it really was that old Wild West kind of thing that you hear about, with the Saturday night brawl.
Well, Mark, this bar was the Jim Bridger Bar and Cafe.
Okay.
So
For those of you who do not know Jim Bridger, he was a mountain man.
It was one of the craziest experiences in my life, but it was a really good experience because it was cathartic, after going through and putting myself through school selling American Indian art. This is going to become a circle here.
So that's an interesting thing. So you were selling Indian art
from my senior year in high school all through college, and that's how I paid to go to college.
And that was mid-'70s, mid-'70s. And were you selling jewelry?
Early 70s, guys.
Yeah,
72 to
right, which was, for people who
78.
don't know, and I think it's a really important point of our business, is that there was a craze in Native American art late 60s to early 70s. You couldn't find squash blossoms because there were so many people wanting them. And so you were right in that time frame, right?
We were, in 1972, my sister went into business with a guy named Eb Lewis from Show Low, Arizona. And they had a bench, and they had like 12 jewelers that spent every single day stringing liquid silver and heishi and turquoise tabs and nuggets.
Right, and for those who don't know what a bench is, that is where a silversmith's set up. It's like it's a store.
It's an assembly line or a workshop.
But it's Native American made because you had Native American doing it, and so they would work 8 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Sometimes, 8, sometimes 10, I guess.
And mainly silver liquid.
The orders were ridiculous. Most of the department stores that I had accounts with don't exist anymore, but they were major, like I. Magnon's and Joseph Magnon's and Nordstrom's and Broadway. And the bigger the companies were, the longer they took to pay me. But, I could go into a store with 10 pounds of heishi and liquid silver and sell every single piece.
Yeah.
It was insane.
And now that is, and you're still doing college at that point?
Yeah, I started this in high school.
Yeah.
And my brother went to USC, and he sold too. Well, he put himself through USC selling Indian jewelry, but he did have the help of a full scholarship.
And did any of, that helps. And did you know any of the players that were kind of became part of the leaders in our field, like Bob Gallegos? I know Bob was dealing in Indian jewelry at that time. There was a few of them that were. Well,
we were in Southern California, so my sister that had the business with Eb and Sholo, she lived in Michigan. So every winter, she and her husband would come out and stay at my parents' place, and they would do the Great Western, which was a once a month flea market on a Tuesday night in an old warehouse in Los Angeles. And so I started helping them, schlep their stuff to the show, and met Mark Winter and Ron Munn and George Marsick, and then they started doing the Santa Monica Indian Show.
And this is, you were early 20s, maybe?
I was 18 years old.
Wow.
I think I was 19 when I met Mark Winter. So, he was still wearing the T-shirt that said, I buy Navajo blankets.
I'm going to ask Mark about that when I have him on.
Well, my sister sold Mark the oldest Navajo serape that's known to exist, that's up at...
I've heard about that story.
Durango.
I will bring that one up, too.
Yeah, well, Mark will love to share that story. It's actually a wild and crazy story.
So the question is, you're going to college, you're dealing really very successfully in Indian jewelry, right?
very successfully.
Didn't you go at that point, hey, maybe I should do this instead of going ahead and getting the degree,
No,
working for the girls' house and, going to the bar and all that? I mean,
I think the reason why I sort of got along with you, like right from the start, when I think a lot of people just didn't understand you at all because you were Dr. Mark Sublette, and you were young to be a doctor first, and then to be a doctor who's hanging out and looking at Navajo blankets and stuff. Everybody looked and said, what is this guy's story? But I was getting my degree in pre-med, and I was teaching human anatomy and human physiology to pre-med students.
To people like me.
So I understood you more than most people would have understood you, because I think we both kind of came from, the same area where we, had a desire to be involved in the sciences.
Right.
But then, we kind of got sucked into the amount of fun it was to just buy and sell things and not have the responsibility.
Yeah, and for me at least, I know that I would buy and sell and make money, and it just didn't, but I didn't see it as a job at first. I didn't see this as being a way that I could actually make a living.
Well, it's kind of an embarrassing job after you've put yourself through, 4 or 5 years of college.
About 12 for me.
I had a full scholarship to go to medical school with the Navy, and the month before I went, I said, I think there's somebody who needs to do this more than me.
Now, here's the funny thing.
So I bowed out at that level.
You're
then,
smart, yeah.
But I wasn't done thinking that I was going to have a career. I mean, I'm not an unintelligent person.
Right.
And I thought, well, my parents struggled their whole life. Nobody had ever, finished a real college degree in the family, and I was the first one.
It was security in a way that you could go throughout life and know you're going to have
so,
money.
When it didn't work to go to medical school, when I said, I don't want to give 10 years to the Navy, so I just had to go another...
instead.
I just had to do another year and a half, and I got the degree in human behavior and psychology. But my husband had already set me up to get an interview with HR at McDonnell Douglas, and that was what confirmed it with me, that I would never take a real job. So why would I even finish my thesis? Because I was never going to use that master's degree.
Isn't that funny how you knew at that point? And do you know why that was, that it pushed you? I mean, at that point you go, okay, I don't need that, and I'm just going to do this.
Well, I mean, for a person who taught and did autopsies in 1974, to think that I was going to spend the rest of my life, working at a desk in an HR department at McDonnell Douglas, that was like the most depressing thought I could ever have passed through my mind. And I thought, I had the most fun that I could ever have had was just buying and selling Indian stuff. And it was easy to go back and fall back on, because by then Ralph Lauren was, doing his ads, using American Indian basketry.
And what year would have this been, would you think, that you...
Well, this was like 1984.
84.
I went back to Southern California. My sister came out for the winter, like she always had, and we're both at my parents' house, and she said, we had an idea of starting a quilt business. And she lived in Michigan, and there was 5 Amish communities all around her. And she had her degree. She had an AA in space planning and interior design. So she was an artist, and her husband was an artist. And so we went into business together, and we started this quilt business. We ended up with 350 Amish that worked for us.
Wow.
And we did that for about 5 or 6 years, but I opened a shop and a gallery in Pasadena, California, and so I dealt in textiles and went back into the Indian jewelry and Indian artifacts. So it was always Native American and textiles. So
not long after you said, I'm not finishing the thesis, you opened your antique store.
No, that was actually even. I had my antique store and everything before.
You did. So you were already.
I was already back doing this like on the side while I was getting my master's degree, but it just clinched it. It was like,
that sounds very, that rings true with what I did too. You know?
And then especially once I had my son, my in-laws were NASA and JPL people. Mm-hmm. So my father-in-law was gone always, and my husband fell in his footsteps, and he worked for McDonnell Douglas and would be gone for 6 months to a year and a half at a time. Mm. So Mac was born, and 5 days after Mac was born, Harris left for, I think, a year and a half.
Oh my!
So there was a lot of time when I was spending time with myself and developing the business. So I would just, drag Mac to work with me, or I'd drop him off with my parents. And so I had a lot of time to concentrate on developing my business sense and the human behavior skills that I did learn in doing that was more business psych rather than abnormal psych. Because, of course, I'm one of the most normal people in the world, so I never really thought of doing counseling or abnormal psych. We're all different shades of crazy.
And did you catch hell from anybody, like your husband or your family, that said, my God, you've got a degree in psychology, you could have been a doctor.
Every one of them.
Did they all say, don't do this, you're going to fail?
Well, I probably ended up divorced because, my husband was gone all the time working.
Right.
I developed a business, and as you know, we met doing shows. We were doing shows around the country.
Right.
And he comes home after my son's 5 years old and playing baseball, decides he's finally going to move back in the house and live at home with us.
Right.
And he says, what do you mean you're going to Marin for a week? And I said, well, this is what I do.
Right.
5 years, he's been gone. And so he finally realizes I had a business. He thought it was a hobby.
And what year was that, would you have said? Do you remember?
That was 91, 92, when things were really heating up, and I was finally getting some traction.
Yeah, heating up in the fact that Native American Western stuff was very hot.
It was
People
hot.
really buying it, especially
prices
the
were
stuff.
going up.
Yep, they were.
You and I were, learning our chops and starting to buy higher end stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, this mystery husband comes home and goes, "What the hell? What do you mean you have a job and a business and you travel?"
Right.
And I said, yeah, what did you think I did during the last 5 years? Stayed home and knit?
Yeah.
So it sort of like kind of went from there to my eventually choosing to leave LA and go to Albuquerque, with him having the intent of finding a different job and following us. But, they're a family that Bud landed the first unmanned machine on the moon. He landed the Ranger on the moon. Wow. That was my father-in-law.
Wow.
And stayed till Voyager and, retired as a vice president of JPL. And my husband just retired from Boeing and was hired, at a college work fair.
Yeah.
So they're kind of people that stick with what they do.
Right.
So Harris never actually moved to New Mexico, but my son and I did.
I remember
we
that, actually. I remember when all that happened,
Yeah, and then, once you do that and buy a building,
you're in.
You're all in.
Yeah, I remember being in 1990, I think it was. No, maybe 89, actually, doing Kim Martindale's show. First time I did his show with my wife, we did it. I was still practicing medicine as a Navy doctor, and I remember telling Kim Martindale, I got to go, man. I got to catch my flight, and I wanted to leave an hour early, and he was flipping out, and he says, you can't do that. That's not how it works. And I go, listen, I'll be thrown in the brig if I don't get back. I have to be there. I mean, I'm a physician. He goes, well, I'll let you do it, but I don't like it, and if you're going to be in this business, you need to play by the rules that everybody else does. I said, okay, I understand. I got to take this a little more seriously. And it wasn't. It was two years after that, really, 3 years after that, that I said, okay, I'm starting Medicine Man Gallery. But
Yeah, I think it was the second or third time I met you. You adjusted my back.
I remember that.
It might have been at Miranda.
Yeah, I remember. It's hard to believe that. To have some water. I'm gonna do my Starbucks.
Yeah.
For those who want Starbucks, if you're out there, we could use a sponsor for this podcast.
Well, maybe you can have a meeting with them on the 29th when they close for the day for their
Which I like.
racial biasing training.
Yeah, I think that's good, though. I think they do need to do that, quite frankly.
God, can we get the whole country involved
Well,
in that?
it's funny. I even thought about just doing it in my own business because, we've got 10 employees, and though we are racially diverse with lots of different ethnicities represented, it's probably not a bad idea. I mean, I think it's interesting because you and I have lived in New Mexico. I grew up in New Mexico. You've been there so long, you consider yourself a New Mexican. And I think New Mexico is its own little world compared to other states because it is such a triculture with Pueblo, Native,
it's
Hispanic. You don't feel. I mean, I've never really felt. I don't know. It seemed normal to have lots of different.
Well, it's forced integration.
Yeah.
When you move there, it isn't like you're going to buy a house in the white neighborhood.
Right.
You're going to buy the house in the black neighborhood, or the Chinese neighborhood, or the Indian neighborhood, because there isn't one of those.
No, it's everywhere.
I
think everyone should go to New Mexico and spend about a year, and I think you'd learn a lot better how to deal with other ethnicities.
Frankly. I think it's a good place for people once they're actually more comfortable with multiple ethnicities. Right. It may be a little bit of a shock factor for people who the political scene, and I don't want to get too political, but the political scene of during the campaign, it was so ironic for me to watch by growing up in Chicago, which was a city that was affected seriously in the 60s.
Oh yeah, 68 was really
for
shocking.
Racial strife, and the Democratic Convention brought out so many different racial problems. And I grew up with colored bathrooms, white bathrooms, drinking fountains, being in a school that was, an all-white school and busing.
Yeah, I got bused too. Even in New Mexico, we got bused.
And then when I moved to California and I met people who actually grew up on the West Coast and never experienced segregation, because at least in California, there was always a few Asians and there were some Mexicans and there were some black people that they grew up with and a few black kids in school or anything. They never experienced the segregation that people who grow up in the Midwest or the East do. Yeah. And so for me, I looked at the whole thing with the Rust Belt and everything, and I have a different understanding of where people are coming from. It's almost like we really need to do in our own society is to do a program where we send our kids across the country, or send our kids to Iowa or Kansas.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Wisconsin,
I think it helps.
And give them an opportunity to really see how different people are.
Well, don't you find also in this business that we do, which is buying and selling of all sorts of things, and you do a wide variety, it's not just Native American stuff, you do lots of antiques, that it helps to have really good people skills when you're doing this, because you're having to, one of the things that kind of surprised me about this business was that you have to help people at their lowest sometimes. They're divorced, their taxes, their mom and dad died, they have all this stuff. And they're vulnerable, and it's an easy time for people to be taken advantage of. And I think it seems to me the better people skills you have, and maybe just what you're getting back to about having been raised in Chicago and seeing all these things, helps you deal in those situations better than if you don't have those skills. or the problems?
Well, I was always the one that had to fix the toilet and everything else,
That's
as
my
I'm
wife.
sure you know.
No, that's my wife. She's very good at it.
Well, you have a team.
I do have a team. She's an important part of that team.
I've always been, even though Janine has always co-owned the building, and
Right.
and Victoria Roberts, she's always been a help with me for the show.
Right.
I've always kind of had to run the show alone, but for the last couple of years, I've had the same staff. Michael Arrows has been with me for 18 and a half years.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, too.
Skip has been with me 17 and a half years.
That says something about you, too, by the way, I think, when people stay that long.
It's probably that I'm just not a very good aggressive manager. But I watch them both. They're still growing, so as long as there's a growth curve, I keep encouraging them. I don't hire people. I just adopt them. They become part of the
17
the
years is a
family.
very, very long time. Now, you do... you're talking about the show, but I don't know if, you're a dealer, you have Cowboys and Indians, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that too, but one of your things that you're really working on, and this is your 19th year for the Great Southwestern.
This is our 20th year.
So it's your 20th year. That's a big deal.
This is our 20th anniversary. And, it's one of the things that I really love still doing in the business is... not all the day-to-day part of putting the show on, but what the show brings to our community in Albuquerque, because we have made the show from the beginning, from the first year. We've made this a charity event, and
for those people who don't know, this is an antique show that has Native American, Cowboy and Indian, great antiques. It's the first week in August every year. And
it's called the Great Southwestern Antique Show.
Right. It's really what we think of in the dealer world as the kickoff to the whole Indian, Native American, festivals that go on in Santa Fe, and you're like the beginning stop for everyone.
Yeah, well, that's something that I can really feel good about, because in a world today where specialty shows are having a lot of trouble, still holding their own either with the number of dealers they have or their customer base, I think the diversity of the show has really kept it alive and kept people's interest.
You have what, 100 and...
We've got about 160 dealers.
160 dealers, and that's got to be the largest show, really, right?
It's the biggest show.
Yeah, it's the biggest show because none of the other ones in Santa Fe have that many dealers.
No, and to think it started out with me in an 8x8 foot booth, and I would trade half of the cost of my booth because I couldn't afford Don Bennett's prices. So I would trade half of the cost of my booth and work for 2 days putting up walls.
Wow.
In that show.
Wow.
And then I would help Kim too. I'd get $1,000 off my booth at Marin putting up walls. But you remember at the time I was a bodybuilder, so
I do remember that.
I was pretty buff and I was very strong.
Well, most people would say you are still very strong.
Yeah, well,
in many ways, Terry
it's
Schurmeier.
Amazing how your age catches up with you. But
so when you started that show, which was 20 years ago.
1999.
I'm sure everyone, and I even remember, that show's not going to make it. And so how do you deal with that kind of stuff when people are telling you, no, we have too many shows, you're not going to make it?
Well, I still have people who express resentment for the show.
Isn't that amazing? What kind of people? Is that like dealers or?
There's dealers that have resentment for the show because they feel that some of the problems and the demise that has taken place, or corrosion that has taken place that involves some of the Santa Fe shows, they feel that that's attributed to me because...
there you have it, folks.
Because
pettiness never goes away.
I mean, it's crazy, the whole concept, because, the reason why most people do the show in Albuquerque, especially those that are from out of town, which we have a higher percentage of out-of-town people
Right.
than in-town
Right.
dealers.
Right.
We attract those people because they can come into a show and buy and sell
Right.
and bring other things and have a better opportunity to make some money, so they can successfully go into Santa Fe and pay the higher prices for their booths
Right.
and not have to worry or not have to cancel, or not have to just not show up because
Right.
they can't afford to do it. Because unfortunately, as you know, in our business, a lot of the shows have priced the people who helped us become who we are today. The shows have eliminated that lower picker level
Right.
of individuals that can afford to come to the show.
Right.
And Santa Fe is expensive enough
It is.
that it's truly not affordable for the pickers to even come.
Right. And for those who don't know what a picker is, they also call them a scout. They're individuals that, there's an American Picker Show, which you can see.
Yeah,
and
everybody knows what a picker is.
Well, you know what? You'd be shocked. You would be, well, that show has helped.
It
But
does.
it's a group of individuals that really help dealers like ourselves who have businesses that are brick and mortar kind of businesses to find material. And I think it's gotten extremely difficult for those people because the antique shows that, like Brimfield, are not what they used to be. You have eBay, you have Craigslist, you have all these competing factors for individuals to find material, and for the typical picker, who is, at least in our field, I think is an older individual, probably 60 or older for most of them. I think it's hard, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And
Actually dying out,
we
in my
have
opinion.
fewer pickers of our old stock because they're old,
That's right.
And the young,
We're the young guys right
and
here.
the
You're
young
looking at
guys,
them,
we are the young ones in the
Yeah.
business. That's why we're still here. And
Yeah. Yeah. So do you, you run an antique store. You have a co-op. Cowboys and Indians is a co-op and for antiques. How has that changed over the last 20 plus years? That must be hugely different. I go to most antique stores now and I go, wow, there's just Hummels and just, I don't see the material.
It's pretty interesting, from the year we opened Cowboys and Indians in 1995.
I remember.
I
I was in there at one time.
Just 3 days ago, we hear the same thing from people who are their first time they walk in the building. It's like, wow, this is like a museum.
Yeah, still has good material.
Then, after they look a little while again, then they go, this is more stuff in one place than we've seen anywhere in the country.
Yeah, I believe that.
And especially the older people, the older collectors that
Right.
come in, they go, I've just wasted 3 days driving across the United States, stopping at antique malls, and I just should have just drove here.
Right. Well, and you think that's because you've been able to put a group of really more at the higher end, I wouldn't even say picker kind of people. You really have great dealers that have just said, I'm going to stay here. It's a collective. I don't think you're the average.
We still have most of our original dealers
Well,
from
that tells
23
you. So
years
that tells
ago.
you, yeah. So what happens when those go?
Well, I don't know. I guess it's time to sell the building. I
Yeah.
don't know.
That is a concern, I think, for us.
Really, I have to be honest. The business isn't what it used to be. And you were a smart guy and broadened. I'm considered diverse in our industry.
I think so. I would definitely consider you diverse.
However, I stuck with historic material
Right.
primarily. I stick primarily with New Mexican and Native American. We do some vintage, but that's become more of in the last 5-7 years with my involvement with the Japanese, which is a whole nother podcast topic.
No, I wanted to hit that a little bit because I think it's very interesting.
It's not easy to maintain a gallery like Cowboys and Indians
I
in
wouldn't think so.
2018.
Yeah.
The price point of our items has definitely dropped. We used to occasionally have a $200,000 war shirt in
Right.
the store.
Right.
Haven't had one of those in the store for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I've actually sold the $600,000 painting. Haven't had one of those in the store.
And is
for
that
a long
because you
time
can't
either.
find the material?
You know, I don't think that I'm alone in the business that is, as a person that is stunned that we haven't seen more quality material surface in the generational shift that we're going through.
Right.
You know, you touched on the point of dealing with people's estates and
Right.
dealing with, you know, the 30 and 40-year-olds who are losing their parents or who
Right.
have lost their parents. But, you know, I think we probably did a better job than we imagined when we really nurtured our clients, because I think you were always an educator and I was always an educator in my business. And, you know, there's a great percentage of our cohorts that are not educators.
No,
But-
just the opposite, I'm afraid. To some extent.
Exactly.
They want to keep
you know,
the
they want
knowledge
to keep
close.
all of what they know to themselves,
Right,
so
and
they
then they
can be
die
the
with that,
expert.
and then nobody gets that information, which I think is one of the real travesties. And one of the reasons, actually, I want to do a podcast was, you know, we have people like yourself who has 30, 40 years of experience in this business. You know, we want that information out, so our business just doesn't end with us. That other people are interested in it, that there's knowledge that's passed forward, and I think it's important to do that. I know you do that, and I think others need to too. For all those others out there, you know who you are. Share.
Well, it's so important. But on the other hand, I do think it's because we educated our clients along the way that we all know the prices are down, and the younger kids, the 30s and 40-year-olds, a lot of them haven't even bought their first house.
Right.
That, you know, the whole business world and the economy now is driven in a technological manner, which makes people take on projects rather than careers. And a lot of people have 6-month project contracts or a 1.5-year contract.
Right.
And they move so often that we don't have the grounding that it takes. People need to buy a home. They need to, you know, have their kids in a school, and they need to know they're going to be somewhere for a while before they want to invest, you know, $50,000 in to a great painting.
Yeah, or even 5,000.
You know, or 5,000.
Right.
You know, I mean, we're talking about people whose lives are pretty mobile.
Right.
And a lot of them, they get into their 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment and they buy their furniture and have it shipped in from Kia
Right.
or Wayfair.
Right.
And when the project is over, they sell everything on Craigslist and they move to the next project and they order the exact same furniture because that keeps their life manageable.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't blame them. The amount of stress that people are, you know, being subjected to, human behavior in an industrial sense was what I was going into. And the amount of material that people are subjected to today.
No, it's true.
Whereas I think when we were younger...
But is it good material?
Well,
See,
that's
the
the
thing.
problem is, though,
You know?
that don't you think that there's so much static and white noise that goes through people's heads, they can't even let their minds rest enough to really necessarily appreciate art.
Yeah.
Whereas when you and I were growing up, our parents were a lot more monochromatic
Yeah.
than we certainly have become.
Well, I think that...
And art was exciting.
Yeah, and but I do think the things that online has given people that we didn't have, which I would have loved to have, is the ability to educate oneself in a rapid fashion. So when I wanted to learn about Navajo rugs, there was only a few ways to do it. I read a book, or I went to an art dealer, or I went to a museum. And those things would help me learn how to price, how to know things. Because there was no way to know what a rug is worth.
Well, but Mark,
because there was no eBay or
on the
Etsy
same
or,
hand, though, that's also why you and I are becoming obsolete. Because people can go
You.
online. Well, yeah, I'll say me. Well, I am older than you, whether I am in actual age or not. But people can learn things so quickly.
Right.
And, you know, when we were starting in the business, the auction houses were our best friends.
Yeah, because we could buy material.
We could go in and buy
Right.
high-end material
Right.
that scared the hell out of customers that we sold
Right.
to. Because it wasn't that they didn't want that $2,500 object.
Right.
It was that they were afraid of whether or not it was legitimate or not,
Right.
whether it had restoration or
Right.
not. So that's when the gurus all,
Right.
came into play.
Right.
But
Nothing's changed there, by the way, though. There's still, I mean, in the sense of they still should have the gurus there because there's still issues.
well, that's why we have, Antique Tribal Art Dealers
Yeah, that's right.
Association and an
That's right.
arbitration board, because you do still need gurus, and all of us still make mistakes, even though
Of course, that's part of the learning
we've got
process.
80 years experience
Yeah,
or 75
shocking.
years experience, but we still screw up.
Yeah.
Thank God that way, you're still alive.
And that's how you learn, by the
Sure,
way. People who don't,
absolutely.
you have to take risks when you buy. That's
Always.
part of the education process. What I think you would agree with, I know for me, is as you do it longer, you make better choices when you make these decisions, because you can go, oh, I remember when I bought that once before, something like that.
Well, yeah,
and it
we
was
stopped buying
not right.
we stopped buying rugs in the dark a long time ago.
Yeah.
You
yeah,
know,
it's true.
not that we still don't get tempted once in a
Right.
while, but
In other words, look at it, see it. You want to see for the stains and the problems, not just,
Right.
use all your visual, use all your tactile senses. Smell it. Does it have?
Exactly.
It's really true.
And I mean, so as we learned, you make fewer mistakes, which I think is
Hopefully.
it's the dividing line of whether or not you become a good business person and you become successful.
It's true.
Or not.
It is true.
I mean, and there's so many different levels of decisions that make the difference. I mean, you and I both know people that have great eyes, and they are great at picking, but they're terrible business
No,
people.
it's true. Yeah, they don't get it.
So many people in our business that have been in this business for 20 years, they never bought a building for their store.
Right.
They've paid rent.
Right.
Sometimes in the same location for
Right.
25 years.
Or they didn't hire people to expand. I mean, I think you have to have, like you have, 4 or 5 people that have worked for you for 20 years. It allows you to do more if you expand. You have to take those risk factors and have stores, have
Well, it
people.
also kept me in the game because I didn't realize it when I was younger, but as I get older, I think I have more and more ADD. So my attention span was never very good.
Mm-hmm.
It was great for learning, but as far as life goes, I get bored really easily, and so having help, I never thought, never in my life did I think I'd be able to afford to hire people.
Yeah.
But when Mac, my son, was a freshman in high school, and I inherited Adrian, my foster son, and he was in a different private high school, and they were both freshmen.
Mm-hmm.
I was a full-time driver. They were both in athletics, and so that's when I had to hire my first full-time people.
Right.
Was because I had another job. I was mom, dad, and I had a mortgage on my house. I had a mortgage on the store, but I had a commitment to like 20 of some of the best dealers in the country.
Right.
To have a store open 7 days a week. I'm in my 36th year of having a business open 7 days a week.
Yeah, that's shocking. That's hard. I know.
And to stay to
I
where
can tell you
can
as a business owner, that's a very difficult
and to
thing
stay
to do.
to where you can still say you like what you do.
Mm-hmm.
36 years later. If I didn't have help, there's no way I'd still be doing this.
Well,
You know.
one of the things I really find fascinating is that, you talk about your ADD and how you're looking for different avenues to keep you excited. Now, you've done this with Japan. You've gone to Tokyo 4 times.
4 times, yeah.
How many?
4.
4 times. Yeah. Now, I can tell you, as a dealer, I really respect that because you're looking for different markets, you're opening different markets. How did that whole thing happen, and how has that affected your business, would you think?
Well, I was chosen. There was a Japanese guy that I met at a vintage show.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria and I were doing a show in Los Angeles. It's called Inspiration.
Right, another show you do, and really are one of the few Native American dealers probably doing that, if not the only
Well,
one.
we actually have attracted quite a few more.
Yeah.
You get
Oh, that
the
happens.
flocking factor.
Yeah, people go,
But,
ooh, let's see what Terry Schurmeier's doing.
Well, thank you. But,
It's true. That is true.
The show, that Inspiration is one of the most inspirational events that I have been to in 10 years of my life.
Wow,
And,
that's something.
like 7 years ago when I went the first time, I thought, okay, I can stay in business for another 5 years. I can do this. This is exciting, and it gave me all kinds of new ideas, because this is a conglomeration of people from all over the world that deal in handmade and custom made and vintage stuff
Of all types.
of mostly clothing, and hats, and motorcycle stuff. It's a Japanese owned show.
It's once a year.
Once a year in LA.
I see.
And they did a couple of shows in Brooklyn that we did as well. But so anyway, I'm at this show.
Which you were invited to do.
We were invited to do the show, and Vicki had been there the year before with Doug Billmeyer, who's the vice president of Vintage at Ralph Lauren. And she said, Terry, you got to come do this show. This is like a really cool show. So Vicki and I packed all of our crap, and we go to LA, rent a showcase, and set up. And we were just stunned how cool this was. There were people with like plastic tarps on the ground with just piles of Levi's, or piles of old work boots. There was $1,200 T-shirts.
There still is. They're just
this was 7 years ago.
Right.
I mean, vintage has kind of become popular again,
more.
the vintage
that's right.
clothing thing, which I have to laugh because people say, oh, God, vintage is like so big now. And I think, 35, 36 years ago, I was set up at the Rose Bowl.
Right.
And the Japanese were coming and buying T-shirts and Converse tennis shoes then.
So when you did that show that first time, was a hit financially? You made money? I mean,
we made money. We didn't make as we were like really hoping. We thought we were gonna, just kill it. But of course, we didn't even know what we were doing or what we were bringing. And I mean, as you've seen in the past, we kind of brought a whole entourage. So there was Vicki and I and Michael Eros, and I think Bob Joyce from Omaha came in. So we had so much cool vintage stuff. We overwhelmed everybody.
Right.
And we had a price point that wasn't as high as a $1,200 T-shirt, but we were consistently high on everything.
And was this...
Where most people had $10 T-shirts and maybe a $1,200 T-shirt, but they'd have hundreds of $10 T-shirts.
So your price point was higher.
Our price point was higher than everybody in the show on an item by item
But I think that's
basis.
a good thing.
Well,
I'd rather be the top person in it.
I think part of it was what this attracted this old Japanese guy. I guess he was about 75 then, and he had come with this young Japanese guy who was trying to look like a cool biker guy in 50s type dress, but everything he had on, you could tell, like his jeans were $1,000 jeans. And so, you're trying to look cool and hip and vintage, but everything's ironed. Yeah. There's such snappy dressers in Japan.
And so was most of the clientele coming through this from Japan?
that year there was probably 3,500 Japanese.
Wow.
So they all flew in
Right.
to LA, and it's always on the Rose Bowl weekend. So
Yeah.
the show is a Friday
Right.
night party and then a Saturday
Yeah, it's
show.
in like February or something.
Yeah, and
right?
then everybody packs up on Saturday, and then they all go to the Rose Bowl on Sunday. So it's a whole vintage weekend.
And for those who don't know what the
celebration.
Rose Bowl is, that's a big antique show that's once a month in California, and I've done it. It's a zoo.
It's not what it used to be, certainly.
And that's exactly
but-
right. I mean, and when we say that is because used to you could go to something like that and buy just a ton of things. Now to me, it seems like there's a lot of produced things there, not so much.
And it's also, I mean, it's the same problem as, shopping antique malls across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Today's collectible is not our collectible.
Yeah.
What you're seeing in antique malls now, I mean, people are collecting 90s
Right.
T-shirts,
Right.
and 80s and 90s stuff, and when
So
when
what they're
look
looking
back,
for,
I
maybe
look
it's
at
still
80s,
great.
I'm going
Yeah.
like, that was the worst decade.
I just need to go clean out my closet because I still have a lot of the 70s stuff.
We'll let Vicki and I come over.
Yeah,
and
no,
clean
I
out
mean,
your
I
closet.
actually do have some of that material.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting ride. Japan has been so much fun, and it's made it so worthwhile for me to have stayed in the business and kept my interest, because I mean they have treated me so well over there,
And they get it. That's one of the reasons you like it so much is they really
oh my God,
appreciate
well,
it.
the Japanese are they love America. They loved the whole concept of America and being able to have free enterprise. I mean, they still live under an emperor.
Yeah.
And from, I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but I've been told by Japanese businessmen that they pay 57% on their profits.
Wow.
So I think even people who are very successful, still feel like they're oppressed by their government
structure,
and their life. They're kind of trapped, and it's an island, and it's small, and there's so many people,
Right.
and they know their kids aren't going to grow up and have a 3,500 or 4,500 square foot house.
Right.
It's not going to happen. So they have this image of America.
And especially the West, I must say.
Especially
Because, I mean,
the West,
that is
'cause they
America,
love the
right?
West.
That is what I think when people think of
Well,
America, it's the
that's
American
freedom.
West. Yeah.
That was the people who were smart enough
Right.
back east early on that said, I need to go somewhere where I can
Right.
create my own,
Right.
world.
And so, with that in mind, is it really, because it seems to me what their main interest in is jewelry and turquoise and things, but do you find them also interested in other things besides that?
Yeah, they are interested in antique motorcycles and antique cars.
But
and
how about Navajo
vintage
rugs?
clothes.
No?
Well, the company I worked with for 4 years, and I think it's really important for people in the Native American art business to understand that my motivation to get involved with Japan was to introduce real Native American jewelry
Artisans, yeah.
to a country that loved and celebrated Native American jewelry and the tradition of hand-making jewelry so much that they went out and they learned to emulate every single technique, and they're really good at it. Yoshi, the guy that owns Larry Smith, the
Right.
company that I worked with for 4 years, he is an excellent jeweler.
Yeah.
And he started this as a hobby because he wanted to appreciate from every single angle how to cut that metal,
Right.
and to repose, and
Right.
he's probably spent $500,000 collecting Native American, new and old.
Yeah. He gets it, just like we got it.
Yeah, and I mean, so it didn't start out that he was trying to copy Native American art,
Right.
but he's very, very talented. as a jeweler, and he has become huge in Asia.
And so that's where he mainly sells, is to...
He mainly sells in Asia.
Yeah.
And he mostly sells, I'm assuming that the bulk of his sales are through his distributors and online, because his shop is about as big as this room.
Right. But in Tokyo.
In Tokyo. Yeah. And so, there was always people buying Larry Smith while I was there selling, Cowboys and Indians and old pawn and jewelry.
They wanted the Larry Smith.
They wanted Larry Smith and the native jewelry.
Yeah.
So for me, it helped me balance things out in the business, because since I never went to the contemporary side, I've made a lot of friends in the industry and everything else, but I never really felt like I contributed a lot to contemporary Native American art, other than museum donations or money or something like that. But I thought, well, if I go to Tokyo, I'm going to bring real Native American art, and I'm going to end up building an educational program. And my long-term goal was to bring some jewelers over there and do demonstrations. And I met and visited with Steve Lawrence, and he and his son go over and dance, and they've been involved with the U.S. Embassy over there. And so I'm seeing this growth into this whole big event, in Tokyo and stuff. But Japan's very small, and everybody, it has to deal with their own reality. And so we're thinking, grand scale. They're gonna, start bringing Navajo rugs over there and everything. Well, most of them are living in an apartment with 3 generations, and there's really not enough room.
They can put a bracelet on their wrist, but maybe not enough.
A 5x7 wedding picture is a real sacrifice for the rest of the family.
Yeah.
So, but in 2 years after I went to Japan, I got Ted, the intermediary I worked with Larry Smith. I got him together with Mark Winter and Todelina, and they ended up taking one of the Navajo weavers to Tokyo 2 times.
Yeah, wonderful.
And the first show, I think they sold 27 weavings.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the last time you sold 27 weavings in a show that's 2 days? That's a lot of weavings.
A month ago.
Well, lucky you.
Internet. It's called the internet.
Well, that's a little bigger than a little room that's as big as this room.
Well, it's true. And I think one of the things that we have to realize in our business is if we don't embrace online, internet, and all that we're limiting ourselves so much. And, the Japanese market that you've really helped develop, there's probably other markets like that, France and Germany and other ones that could have the same kind of thing. That's
why Vicki and I ended up in France last December.
And how did that go?
Well, we didn't lose money. We paid for our trip.
That's good in our business sometimes.
Especially it rained about half of the week.
And that was in Paris?
Paris is such a walking city. And it was really fun. We were on the left bank with Gallery Flack, who handle historic Native American.
And did you bring a specific kind of thing? Because I know they like the Hopi Kachinas and things like that.
No, we only brought jewelry.
Just jewelry. It's easier to bring in too? Just carry?
Well, yeah, and we were trying to introduce a new audience to Gallery Flack as much as Gallery Flack was trying to introduce us to a new audience of collectors. They had never had a piece of jewelry for sale in their gallery before.
Wow. And this is a gallery that's been for a long time, deals in tribal arts and native arts in Paris.
Sure.
So did you feel that was successful enough to try it again sometime?
Oh yeah, I think both sides, we felt that we would like to do it again, but we would probably do it in conjunction with one of the fashion weeks.
Yeah, that would be great.
And we had no idea what to bring other than the fact, I reminded Vicki that the French are small like the Japanese are small. And so you really have to select the material.
Small in
in physical size.
physicality as far as bracelets and rings and things like that.
Yeah, and ironically, for years, we could find a lot of small bracelets, and everybody's going, God, they're so small.
Right.
And you end up with a whole collection of stuff that's too small because most of the collectors were guys,
right.
which I think was the original topic that we've never really discussed very much. But then I start going to Japan, and now I can't keep enough small things.
Yeah, so now I know where all my small bracelets
all
have
the
been
small
going.
bracelets are now living in Japan. And
I've learned something today.
A few of them are
I'm going to really be looking
too.
for those. I'm just going to push them your way, and you can push them to...
It's hilarious because, when we were buying, in the early tourist jewelry is what the Japanese have really, jumped on the bandwagon because it's affordable.
Right.
And things are expensive in Japan. And so by the time you multiply a price of a Fred Harvey bracelet times 110, you're looking at 20,000 yen or 50,000 yen or 150,000 yen. And those are just like lots of zeros, just on the scale of what they're used to looking at, when they go to a store to buy something.
Right.
So thankfully there was tourist jewelry. So there was a price point that, was like a magic price point.
Right.
So it helped you sort what to take.
Right.
You'll always sell a couple of super high-end collector's pieces that might not fit. But for the most part, the average collector wants it to fit and fit their budget all at the same time.
Right.
So that was the only real help we had in figuring out what to take. And France is a little bit more high fashion than the Japanese motorcycle guys that we work with. We're literally, selling to guys that have old Harleys and Indian motorcycles. They've all got a picture of Steve McQueen on their bedroom wall. And a couple of them have suggested having an American girlfriend on the side wouldn't be bad either. It's kind of the Japanese guy's dream.
Well, so believe it or not, we've already gone through an hour, and we haven't even got to really discuss one of the main topics I wanted to talk about is how hard it is to be a woman in our business. So in 2 minutes or less, tell us what are the problems and how did you overcome them?
I don't think it makes a difference which business a woman chooses to be in. You're always going to find that you're pretty much, unless it's you're an elementary school teacher or a librarian, because even nursing, there's a lot of guys in nursing now.
Yeah.
I think for, us older gals, no matter what business we chose, we were going to be a woman in a man's world.
Right.
And so I think, today, I think women have the comfort of knowing they can pretty much do anything.
Yeah, that's true. My daughter feels that way, I'm sure.
I needed to get my skin a lot thicker because I was the one that was too empathetic to be a social worker. So, people think I'm really tough, but I'm really not. Like, I give all my money away, and I keep employees for 18 years, even if they're not motivated, and and if their kids are sick, they get off work, and I've always worked my life around everybody else's, which isn't really a tough business person's stance. So I've kind of become like...
No, but it's a good human stance.
I'm a roasted marshmallow. Yeah. I'm a little crusty on the outside, but I'm the
all
biggest gooey person on the inside.
I would believe that. I've always known that about you anyway.
Yeah, I've always been a softie.
So tell me, is there anything else you'd like to, say about your business or you before we call it a day? We're probably going to have you back. I don't think an hour's enough.
If you're thinking, whatever you're thinking about doing in life, do what you really love, and if you're going to be buying art, buy something that makes you really happy, and to hell with what its value is over the long haul, because everything changes.
It's true.
And it comes back around too. There's 1960s surfing T-shirts. Look in your drawers.
Yeah,
Mark.
I'll look.
You could have a fortune there, if you were a surfer.
I surfed and I wasn't very good, and I didn't have a T-shirt. I had my shirt off the entire time.
Well, there you go, because you were buff.
So, yeah, the old days. Terry Schurmeier, owner of Cowboys and Indians, great Southwestern antique show celebrating its 20th year, and an entrepreneur and leader in our field. And I'm thankful for her coming and spending a little bit more than an hour with us, because, it's so important, I believe, to have people like yourself out there, making a difference in the world and also in our business. So thank you for coming.
Well,
I appreciate
thanks,
it.
Mark.
Yeah. Now let's go make a deal, right?
Yeah, let's. We pulled a couple of things.
There you go. That's a true dealer. We're going to do a deal. Thank you. All right. Our dealer diaries. Thanks.
Okay.